Welcome back into your Media Days Craze. I'm Bailey Burmaster, and I'm joined now by Kaylee Manziel, who's going to help me finish this one out. How you doing today?
I hope you saved the best for last.
Listen, we always do, don't we? We always do. We're going to talk a lot about the dogs. Let's just get into it. The more I talk to people, whether it's on Radio Row, in passing, coming into this week, the question is Carson Beck the best quarterback in college football right now?
I mean, I think it's a fair argument. Quinn Ewers would be up there too, but I think to see how quickly Carson's progressed as a quarterback, because people still weren't certain about him even midway through the season. He really didn't come alive until that Florida game. So seeing what he accomplished from midway to the season through the end of the season, I can't even imagine the progress that he's made over the last year.
And I love that you said that, because for me, when I came into Atlanta and watching Carson Beck, I was really, I don't want to say I was like a negative Nancy towards him. Let's see. I want a sample size.
Right.
And I think I really started to become a believer in the Auburn game.
Yeah.
He just showed a lot of, the words I've been using all week is composure. And the more you see him, even here in SEC media, just how he handles media, how he goes about his business, he's very here. Now, that's great to be, keeled, as long as when you get on the field and it comes to that moment where you have to drive the team down to win the game, you can do it. And I feel like he really did start to prove that he could do that down the stretch. Where do you think his game goes this season?
I mean, I don't know many quarterbacks who are worse off in the second year than the first year, but what you were saying, I think the best way to describe Carson Beck is he's a silent killer. Kirby Smart will tell you. The guys in the locker room will tell you he's not the most vocal guy. He leads by example. And in a world now where you have everything that everyone's saying about you at your fingertips, you can go on social media, you can go look at any website and read what people are saying about you. The fact that he has this quiet confidence and is able to quiet the noise on the outside, I think that helps with that quarterback mentality, and that's exactly where we want him going into this season. The expectation is so high. I think the only person that can beat out Carson Beck is himself.
I think that's very fair. But he doesn't seem like a guy that gets rattled.
No, and, we actually went back and listened to his press conference, and similar to what you asked, like, where did things change for you last season? And he mentioned that it was the Auburn game.
He
that
did?
First game on the road and being in that atmosphere and seeing how away crowds really do have an impact on the game. He was like, that's where I really had to grow up as a quarterback, and obviously coming into this season, he knows what to expect out of those games, and I just think the opportunities for him are limitless. He just got a tattoo. I know it's hard to spot because he's got many, but
I was about to say, he's got a lot of tattoos.
It says the sky is the limit, and he said he got it because he wants this concept of never-ending progression, that he can always get better, and it always can be better for him.
We will see how it fares. It's obviously going to look a little different on offense with Ladd gone, Brock gone. Who do you potentially see stepping up? I know a lot of people have been throwing Oscar Delp out there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the biggest questions surrounding this Georgia team is when you don't have Brock and when you don't have Ladd. Who steps up and becomes the go-to guy when things go wrong? I think it could be one of two people. I think it could be Trevor Etienne. We've heard so much buzz about him in the offseason. I know Florida fans were really sad to see him gone. And you almost think of Georgia in the past as RBU, but it really hasn't been that way the past couple years. There hasn't been a standout guy like that. So I think that having Trevor Etienne in that position is going to help out Carson a lot, not having to use his legs as much. But I think in the wide receiver position, when you look at this group on paper, there's not one elite guy that jumps off the page and you're like, yeah, that's the guy. It's a bunch of really good guys. But for me, my guess is going to be Dylan Bell, somebody that's been with Carson from the beginning. We saw a glimpse of what he could do during the Tennessee game last year, and just the impressive plays that he made. I know how close he is with Carson off the field too, so I think that's going to become the guy that Carson goes to when it's like, we got to make sure that this happens.
What do you make on the defensive side of the ball? We can talk about Malachi Starks and Mike Hell, but what do you make of the corner position?
Oh, see, that's the thing is everybody keeps talking about how that might be the weak spot, and that's where the questions arise, because when you think about the great Georgia teams of the past, especially that first-year national championship team, it's been all about the defense, the Georgia defenses, and this is the first year that it's really been an offensive-minded team. But I do think there's a lot of options. There's a lot of good guys in the sophomore group, and the one that really comes to mind that I think is going to be a standout player for us is going to be Dallas Robinson, who's going to be a true freshman this year. He's obviously probably the most talked about recruit of the class, but I think that we're going to see some of the younger guys shine in the corner position. But I'm hoping that some of the veterans that we have in the safety position and the linebacker position will help make up for the questions that we have surrounding the corner. But Glenn Schumann is one of the absolute best defensive-minded coaches in the league, and I know that he's going to have that question answered before the season starts.
What do you make of the expectations for Michael this season?
Oh, I'm so excited to see him in that jack position. Yes.
Yep.
And just his versatility. I mean, he's a big guy who makes a big impact. And, you know, he told us at the end of the season after the Orange Bowl last year that he was not impressed with his entire season as a whole. And it's like you look at him and you're like, really? Because nobody else is thinking that. And so I'm excited to see the progression that he's made this year and excited to see the impact that he makes in that jack position.
You can't talk about Georgia right now without talking about some of their off-field issues with the driving, speeding, tickets. Were you satisfied with Kirby's responses yesterday to those questions?
I'm just glad that we got an answer out of him. I always say that he would make the greatest politician because he's really good at giving you absolutely nothing. But to know that there is something being done on the administrative side, whether that be the fines that they're imposing through the Classic City Collective, and also we found out about 10 minutes before Kirby took the stand that they had let go of David Daniel Sispan for violating team rules. We can only assume that, you know, it was a driving-related incident. That was the question, is we don't know in the media what goes on behind the scenes or if there was a punishment being imposed in general. So the fact that we got that out of him, I hope it slows it down because I hate that we had to spend so much time talking about the things
we don't want to talk about it.
No, I want to know what's happening on the field. I don't want to have to continue to talk about what's going on off the field. I'm glad that you brought it up because it obviously needs to be addressed.
You got to point it out. It's one of those things, even when you're talking to Kirby about it, you're like, I don't even want to ask you this, but I can't not do my job. We can't turn the blind eye. And I think, you know, to be fair to Kirby, Kirby doesn't come across as the guy that's just going to let it roll off to the sideway. I don't think that's been the case. I think he's trying to handle it, but for some reason it's not going through the kids. And I think he's right at the end of the day with his players. Their voices are going to be so much more heard from them saying something. And I think Carson was even asked about his Lambo, and he was like, yeah, well, I just don't drive it like a crazy person, essentially.
Well, I think a lot of the problem, too, is you can maybe expect that out of the young kids. You're freshly 18 years old. You've got a fast car. You've got lots of money. I think the one that we were the most surprised to hear about was Smile Munden, who's supposed to be a leader on the field and a leader in the locker room. So to hear him being arrested for a driving-related incident, it's like if your veterans aren't following the rules, why are you expecting the young guys to do it? So I'm hoping that whatever punishment they're putting into play now will change the game. And I'm also hoping that once football season starts, their priorities are going to be back on the season and the distractions from the outside will be minimized.
We'll talk about the overall skew of schedules in the SEC this season in a second, but I want to look at Georgia's. So they opened – this is the thing that's been blowing my mind all week. They could play in Atlanta at the Benz 4 times if they make it to the national championship game. I asked Michael what that would mean. He's like, I love the Benz. It's awesome to be in Atlanta, to make this home and be able to do that. So if we can do that, like, let's do it.
It's refreshing to hear you say that and to hear Michael say that because you would think of Mercedes-Benz as almost the second home to Georgia. It's right in their own backyard, but when you look at the timeline of Alabama and Georgia and the history of their matchups in Mercedes-Benz,
it's not good.
No, Georgia has not had that much success. It's like this psychological hump that they have to get over. So I'm hoping that with the Clemson in Game 1, they'll be able to go ahead and get over that hump immediately.
No, absolutely. And some of these games, I mean, their schedule is brutal. I think people overlook it for the mere fact that it's Georgia, so they can handle anything. But they're at Kentucky, at Alabama, Auburn, at Texas, Florida, at Ole Miss. Obviously ran out with Georgia Tech, but I mean, the one everyone has circled is in Austin on October 19th. It's going to be insane. I was telling someone earlier, I mean, I think our hotels were like over $2,000. Yeah. Flights are insane. It's also the same weekend of Formula One at Circuits of America.
And there's a big Major League Soccer game in Austin that weekend, too. So it's just like the list just keeps growing.
With Austin FC. So there's just a lot going on. Which game are you looking forward to most on the schedule?
Everybody wants you to say Texas, right? It on paper might be the biggest road game that Georgia's had in the last decade. But for me, I'm excited to go to Ole Miss.
I don't think that's a bad answer.
I have never been to the Grove before. I've only heard myth and legend. But I do know that when Trey Harris spoke to the media on the first day of SEC Media Days, he talked about the impact that Sanford Stadium had on the outcome of the Ole Miss Georgia game, and he said that he was excited for Oxford to return the favor. So I'm excited to see how Ole Miss brings it and just be in that environment. And then, of course, Alabama as well. I've never been to Tuscaloosa and Bryant-Denny Stadium. I know. The road schedule.
I haven't been for a football game, but I've been separately, and even then it was like, okay, this is a whole nother level.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear Dixieland Delight in person. I'm a little bit ashamed to admit that, but I'm probably
we'll keep that secret. We'll keep that secret. We won't tell anyone.
Yeah, don't narc on me right here. I could get in trouble for that. But, I mean, just the strength of schedule in terms of away games. On paper, it's like, oh my gosh. But then again, if Georgia does make it to the SEC championship and potentially the playoff and potentially the national championship, you know that they're going to be battle tested because they've done everything that they've had to do, especially in those away game environments.
Let's talk about another Georgia connection. Brock Vandergriff has made his way to Kentucky. What are the expectations for him with the Wildcats? Do you think they're getting something bigger out of him than they really recognize?
I think because Texas and Oklahoma have come into the SEC, it's kind of taken away from some of the other teams that we would usually spend more time talking about. I don't think that the people in this room are talking about Brock Vandergriff enough. We talked a little bit before this. He was so beloved by not just the team, but also the Athens community because he was the hometown kid. He led his high school to a state championship. This is a kid who knows the feeling of winning and knows what it takes to lead a team to a championship. He brings so much, not just in the passing game, but also on the ground, too. You don't look at Vandergriff and think, yeah, that kid's shifty and can and move around, but I think that Kentucky is going to be pleasantly surprised with what Brock Vandergriff brings to the table.
Well, not even just Brock Vandergriff, but I feel like Kentucky has been slept on this entire SEC Media Days. Now, I know they get to the podium and whatnot tomorrow, but no one's talking about them. I feel like people are even talking about Vanderbilt and Mississippi State just a little bit more, which is like, they ain't got a whole lot going on. Let's not overlook Kentucky. And I just, maybe it sets them up for a little bit of recipe for success, given that everyone's just going to overlook them.
Well, I think a lot of that stems from the fact that there's no SEC East and no SEC West anymore, because if we're talking about SEC East, Kentucky's one of those teams that consistently falls second, third, or fourth. But now that they're combined, I feel like Kentucky is one of those teams that kind of gets lost in the middle, and it's going to be up to them to get over that hump into the next tier so that they can be entered back into the conversation.
Absolutely. And we were talking about schedules earlier, and I want to dive into that because this, first of all, you have the 12-team playoff.
Woohoo.
Are you a fan? I've been asking everyone today. Are you a fan?
It means what? An extra 3 weeks of college football? Count me in.
Yep. It elongates the season. They'll have to handle things differently. But what's interesting is you're probably going to get 4 teams from the SEC that go in. But the records, so let's say you go 9-3. To some of these powerhouse programs, that's not going to look like, that's not going to be good enough.
Right. Well,
but it might be very good depending on your schedule.
Yeah, I definitely am interested to see how the committee goes about picking the other 8 teams, the ones that don't get a bye, because there was so much controversy surrounding the college football playoff selection last year with Florida State not getting in, then putting Alabama. They were already under so much pressure, and now you've got the 4 out of 5 power conference champions, and then you've got to pick the other 8. So how much does that record come into play? Do you go with a 2-loss team that maybe their strength of schedule just isn't nearly as good as an SEC team with 3 losses? I really think that this first year of the 12-team playoff is going to have to set the precedent for what it's going to look like in future years. Yep,
and we all remember what happened last year with Florida State. I think they're trying to avoid something like that. I do think the 12-team will cause a little chaos, and that might be a little bit nice and fun for the sport. But let's run through every team's schedule real quick. I want you to give me the games that you like. We'll start with Texas A&M. They open against Notre Dame.
I mean, you've got it highlighted right
I
there.
do. I have highlights of the games I think it is, but, open against Notre Dame is not easy for first-year Mike Elko.
No, absolutely not. I'm very interested to see what Mike Elko does, because even though he's a first-year coach, coming off that stretch with Jimbo Fisher, how much they've paid him and how much they're still having to pay him, there's going to be pressure on Mike Elko to do some good work with Texas A&M, considering that fan base is just so passionate. I feel like You don't necessarily have to win that first game against Notre Dame, but it needs to be competitive. It needs to be close, and it needs to show promise for the Aggies for them to rally behind Mike Elko's cause.
Absolutely. Mark Stoops, year 12 for him. They will face Georgia. They go to at Ole Miss, at Tennessee, at Texas, and then Louisville to end it out. I think that I'm going to say that Kentucky at Ole Miss right now is a trap game.
I think so, too. I feel like when you look at their schedule, let's see, you've got Georgia there, you've got Ole Miss there. There's a game that you maybe aren't favored to win in. If you're Kentucky, you need to win one of those games, and it's at Ole Miss. That makes it a little bit tougher. Who else we got there? I think that Kentucky-Tennessee game is another one that could potentially be a big one for them. A familiar rival that they haven't had much success against in the past. So maybe if he can get over that hump with Tennessee, it'll show a lot of promise for the Wildcats.
So then you have Auburn in year 2 of Hugh Freeze, and I mean their non-con is average. Obviously, they play California, but they have
redeemed themselves right there from last year,
don't they? And I'll say this: Oklahoma and then at Georgia back to back. That's a little bit of a gauntlet, mid-season, early gauntlet right there.
Yeah, they're also Georgia's homecoming game, which is something that we've been talking about this year. But I mean, I feel like that game at Oklahoma.
Do you feel like that's a trap game?
I feel like that game at Oklahoma is going to say a lot, too, because so much of the conversation between Texas and Oklahoma has been about Texas and maybe less about Oklahoma. And it's like, how can you really compare Texas and Oklahoma to the SEC when they haven't faced the same level of competition?
Yeah.
So I really think we're going to be able to make the comparison between the two programs coming in versus a team like Auburn, who kind of falls in that middle ground in the SEC.
We won't spend too much time in Arkansas. I'll point at the one that I like. Obviously, I'm biased for Oklahoma State, but they are at Oklahoma State, and I think that is going to be a point for the Big 12 to try and win that game for the mere fact of, look, you took OU Texas, and here you are playing Arkansas, and the Big 12 can get one. I think they'll push that. Texas, I think we already discussed. I think Oklahoma, and then having to play Georgia.
At Michigan on September 7th.
Right? Whew. That's going to be a tall task for Steve Sarkisian. We're going to skip Mississippi State because we're running out of time. Same with Florida because, their Billy Napier's is a little bit on the hot seat.
I'll make this quick. My bold prediction all season long is I think that when they face off with Georgia, Billy Napier will not be the head coach of the Florida Gators.
Okay, I want to check back in with you on that. Josh Heupel doing great things at Tennessee. He goes back to Oklahoma after spending time. I'm excited to see that. Oklahoma has a wave of a schedule as well. What are your favorite Georgia games, though, before we get out of here?
You got to win game one. You got to win that second SEC matchup at Alabama. I mean, everybody's excited for Texas. I'm excited for Texas, but I'm excited to have Kalen DeBoer face off with Kirby Smart and Georgia Bulldogs in his first ever SEC game.
Week 5. Yeah. First ever. He's going to have chills.
And Georgia and Alabama both have a bye week before that game, so that's a lot of time to prepare.
Too much time to think about it.
Hype. Yes, and I'm curious to see what Kalen DeBoer is going to do in his first SEC game.
What is your prediction for the Georgia Bulldogs?
I think that they lose the regular season game at Texas.
Okay.
I think that they rematch with Texas in the Final Four, beat Texas, and go on to win the national championship. That's been my prediction.
I like that. I don't know if it's going to happen, but I like that. All right. Kaylee, thank you for joining us.
Oh, my gosh, thank you so much.
You're rounding out our Day 3 of Media Days Craze. Make sure to join us one final time tomorrow for the 4th and final day. We'll have all the latest right here on your Media Days Craze. See you tomorrow.
This is Sports Tonight. Now from Atlanta News First Plus, this is Sports Tonight.
Welcome back to your Media Days Craze. I am now joined by Jake. He covers Alabama in depth, so we're going to get into that. I want to talk about Kalen DeBoer at the big podium for a second. He was asked about, the players that have been there and been in the foundation of what the Tide really is and what he has learned from him. What did you take away from his answer? Because he kind of said, it's new grounds for everyone, but at the same time, he can learn a lot from his players.
I found it to be an interesting parallel because it's something actually DeBoer talked about when he was first hired. When he met the team for the first time, he said, hey, let's do this together. And he was talking about the postseason. Because obviously, if you remember, he coached Washington to a national title game, and Alabama was right there before punching their ticket to the national title game. And he said, hey, let's go through this together. We know what it feels like to fall short in the postseason. Why not? And so I feel like, alluding to what you mentioned earlier, there's that common ground where they have that understanding of falling short, that let's do this together. I know there's things that Saban did, and there's things that I like to do too, but let's work together, and I feel like the players have fully bought into that.
Well, and it was interesting because Jalen Milroe was talking in the electronic media room, and to that note specifically, he was like, you kind of have a bond if we both got so close and fell so short that you realize you have the same goal. What is the realistic expectation for Alabama this season?
I know that's like the overarching question, right? And I know a lot of people were talking about where there would be a drop-off with Alabama. I would like to think there won't be. I mean, obviously they have Georgia, but it's in Tuscaloosa, so that's in their favor. But I feel like Alabama has a real shot to get back to the SEC title game, and then from there control their own destiny. And of course, with the 12-team playoff now, anything is possible. But I like to think Alabama won't have much of a drop-off. The one question I do have with Alabama right now is probably the defense and the secondary. I think offensively they will be fine. You think about Coach Kalen DeBoer, an offensive-minded guy, Nick Sheridan calling the plays there. And you think about Jalen Milroe. I mean, this is the third guy he's going to have calling plays for him. He had Tommy Rees, a little bit with Bill O'Brien a little bit, and now he has Nick Sheridan and Coach Kalen DeBoer. So a lot of new things, but I feel like Alabama, there won't be much drop-off.
You brought up the defense. When you look at, Saban retires, which first of all, let's just stop there. What was that like for you in Tuscaloosa when you heard, the news that could be the biggest news in college football is coming down?
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. I mean, I got here 2 years ago this July, and never would I have imagined I'd be covering Nick Saban in his final 2 seasons. But I think once we got toward the end there, I wouldn't say that we knew, but maybe there were some signs where you kind of got to feel that maybe he was getting closer to the end, and there were probably some things. I mean, that's NIL. That's a whole conversation for another day. But I feel like he was getting closer to the end. But when the news broke, I mean, it just flipped everything upside down. I mean, I was actually I remember that day exactly. I was working on a feature story, and all of a sudden I get a phone call saying, hey, you got to go to Tuscaloosa. Nick Saban he's done. And I was like, oh my gosh. And then, then craziness ensued, and here we are now.
And you brought up the defense, and there were so many transfers after. You kind of just saw this trickle. I'm sure Alabama's going, oh no, what are we going to do? But I think the biggest one was Caleb Downs. Well, how big of a loss is Downs going to Ohio State?
Well, a lot of people thought he was going to go to Georgia for a second there. But, it is a big loss. I mean, he was a star as a freshman. I mean, I remember going to the games, just watching him play, especially that SEC title game. I mean, absolute stud. And even I remember after the game on the field, Kirby Smart was, dabbing him up. Obviously, they have that bond there when he tried to recruit him to come to Georgia. So I feel like he is an immensely talented player. So that is a huge loss for them there.
Well, side note, that is very interesting. Caleb Downs' mother was my math teacher in high school. So shout out to Miss Downs. She used to let me come in late all the time as long as I brought her a chicken biscuit. So use that as a note that if you ever need to get to class late, make sure you just come with a chicken biscuit.
There we go.
But no, it's interesting to talk about Georgia and Alabama because when you look at the SEC, to me, those are the 2 teams to beat. People still want to throw Texas up there, but I'm not totally convinced at the moment until they can come into the SEC and win some big-time games. But Kalen DeBoer will get a massive test. Week 5, Bryant-Denny Stadium, Georgia comes in his first ever SEC game. What do you think that week will be like for him? Because it is going to be a whole nother spectacle when you think about TV coverage, that game in general, and just what he's going to feel before kickoff.
Yeah, I feel like you don't need to tell him twice what to expect. I mean, he's been hearing it for, the past 6 months now, replacing Nick Saban. He gets asked those questions all the time. But, of course, it's going to hit different when you step onto the field for the first time in that game. But I feel like he's somebody that is well prepared for it. I mean, he's won everywhere. If you just go down his resume, obviously this is the SEC. It's the big stage, the biggest if people want to call it that. But I feel like he's going to ease right into it. But obviously the expectations are immense. You think about the fans. You think about following up Nick Saban. They want to win. They don't want to drop off. They want to keep this train rolling. So obviously the pressure is going to be there. But I feel like he's somebody that has the persona to do it.
Do you believe that Nick Saban couldn't get into SEC Media Days because he didn't have his credential? I know we're seeing that. He's like, I couldn't get in. And I'm like, okay, who's stopping that man, though, in this setting?
Yeah, one of us. It is remarkable too, because I saw on social media, I think it was a Tennessee station that was just did a one-on-one with him in the hallway, and it's so cool. But I think about, like, if I tried to do that last season, they'd look at me like, who do you think you are?
You
like,
would never be allowed back there, would you?
Yeah, so it's just remarkable to see just the transition, but it seems like he's enjoying it all.
Well, it was funny because we were talking to head coach Kirby Smart, and I just asked him how different it was to, see Saban in a capacity that, here he is now kind of trading in his whistle for a mic and being one of the media. He goes, yeah, I had to do a 15-minute phone call with him, and I had to talk about the team, and I felt like I was giving secrets to Darth Vader, and I just thought that was hilarious that's how he sees it now. For you, who is the top dog to beat in the SEC? Is it, in fact, Georgia?
It's got to be. It's got to be Georgia. I mean, the thing with Georgia is that Alabama, I feel like, at least Nick Saban was always a thorn in Kirby's side, it seemed like. I mean, the big games. I know they had him that one national title game, which is obviously a great feeling for Georgia, but you look at the overall record, the history between those two teams when it comes between Kirby Smart and Nick Saban. Nick Saban obviously has the upper hand, but I feel like now that he's out of the picture, I feel like this is a time for Georgia to really pull away from everybody else, but Georgia really hasn't had much of a drop-off. I mean, I know there's been some seasons they've lost more games than maybe they probably wanted to or thought they would, but Georgia, I mean, they are the top dogs.
Do you believe Carson Beck is the future Heisman winner? And do you think he is the best quarterback in college football right now? By the way, Jake went to Georgia, so if he says yes, you can call him a homer.
No bias here. Well, it's funny because as a Georgia guy, I mean, I'm pretty good about leaving the bias out of it. Obviously, when I was at the SEC title game, you saw your alma mater, die a slow death. But I feel like that's something I'm used to as a Georgia fan because when I was in school, Alabama would just take it to us every time. And so, but I feel like Georgia fans, they're just enjoying the ride. They don't know how long this is going to last. They don't know how many more years Kirby's going to do. But the door's wide open for them to really blow this thing wide open. And so I feel like they're trying to take advantage of that. And when it comes to Carson Beck, I mean, what he did last season was pretty remarkable. You think about sitting behind Stetson Bennett for a little bit and coming in, like, he is definitely in it for the Heisman. I mean, Jalen Milroe's up there too. Texas, their quarterback. I mean, there's a few guys that come to mind, but I'd say Carson Beck is right up there with anybody else. Absolutely.
I've been asking everyone who comes on to talk with us, are they fans of the 12-team playoff? Are you like? Do you like that they vamped it up? Some people are like, no, I liked 4. Some people are like, no, I feel like we could have just started at 8 and see how it goes. Do you like 12?
I think.
Oh, he's a non-believer.
I think like 6, 8 was probably a good number. Because you think about 12, I think about there's going to be some teams that you're going to start talking about load management. These teams, when they know they have it, they're going to be in no matter what. When they have enough wins, they're sitting at the top there.
Kirby's already talked about it.
Yeah,
Kirby was like, our preseason's going to look different because it's a longer season and injuries are going to happen, and we got to manage that.
Absolutely. So you think, professional sports, you see load management all the time, and that was my thing when they say 12 teams. Because you think about Georgia, if they're rocking and rolling undefeated all the way until like the second or third last game of the season, they're like, why are we going to play our best guys?
It makes you wonder too. If this was last year, how more healthy is Brock Bowers?
Absolutely. And that wouldn't even be an argument last season, right? With Georgia, did they deserve to get in? It wouldn't have mattered. 12 teams.
And that's the reality is you're looking at an SEC where 4 or 5 teams could probably get in this weekend. And I think what I like about it is one loss is no longer detrimental, which you bring up Georgia in the SEC championship last year. I think that's what's to like. But I also think you're creating a little bit of room for chaos. Just when you think about the March Madness tournament, there's always the first round, some crazy things that happen. I'm curious if we see crazy things like that happen this time around.
I think you will. I don't know how common it will be. Like, I still feel like your dominant teams are still going to dominate. But I feel like there will be moments like that where you get those upsets. And obviously it's exciting for us as sports fans, but it's going to be interesting. Absolutely.
This is Sports Tonight.